and you keep swinging the axe and keep chopping wood, if you will, and eventually the tree will fall and you'll be back, day after day after day, and stick to the process and keep practicing and keep grinding, and eventually, if you keep swinging the axe, the tree's going to fall.
Hey there, welcome to IndyStar.com. It's the Chopping Wood Podcast. Another week, another podcast. I'm Stephen Holder here with Zach Keefer. We're here to talk about all things Colts, as we always do. And tell you, it's been interesting. We've had a lot going on. This guy named Andrew Luck, there's news about him. We've really just been sort of talking in theory about him, I think, for many of these. But this week we got some news.
I think he's been the lead conversation on this podcast since we started back in early August, late July.
So we should change the name. No, we're never changing the name. No. But anyhow, we'll get into that here in a second. Obviously, lots to dive into on the Andrew Luck front. And we also will sort of recap the Cleveland Browns victory. Colts got their first win of the season, so that's good. They're off to Seattle and the 12th man up at, what the hell do they call that place now?
Quest Field?
CenturyLink?
CenturyLink,
yeah,
right.
Something like that. That really loud stadium in Seattle. They're going there this weekend, and it's going to be a tough place to play. It always is. So we'll get into that. We'll get into, just sort of what this team might ultimately look like as we move forward. They're going to get some guys back. Vontae Davis is going to play this week. Ryan Kelly's really close. And I think the complexion of this team might change a little bit. We'll see if the results do. But the top story, as always, this week is Andrew Luck. And so he did not practice today, and he's not going to practice this week. There was a little bit of, I guess, suspense maybe, because we thought he might get out there today. Well, they elected to hold him back for one more week, and he's going to practice next week. But I think it's real now. I think we can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
And now we have a better handle on things. So first of all, now what? I mean, lay this out for people, right? Like, Andrew Luck's not playing 3 days after he gets back out there for practice, right? I mean,
right.
So just kind of lay that out for people, first of all, because there's a lot of incorrect assumptions on these things.
Yeah, to lay this all out right now, he's in the ninth month of his recovery, of his rehabilitation on that right throwing shoulder that he underwent surgery in January for. So let's say he returns to the practice field next week, which would mean Wednesday, which is usually the first day of practice when they start game planning, etc., for the following game. The Sunday game is against the 49ers at home. It is the Peyton Manning statue game. Peyton Manning's number 18 will go in the Ring of Honor, so there's a lot going on next week. Andrew Luck will not play against the 49ers. Now, that's not been decided, but I can almost guarantee you they're not going to throw him out there on 3 practices. Practice is going to be an important requisite for him to return to the field. And Chris Ballard has said this, and Andrew Luck has sort of hinted at this. He wants a lot of time to practice, and I think 2 weeks is probably the bare minimum for him to be back out there. That puts him at week 6 for a Monday night game at Tennessee in best-case scenario, right? I mean, absolute best-case scenario. But this is something you have been digging on as well, and I kind of talked to some shoulder experts yesterday, and I find it very interesting how this is going to play out, because if he's back on the practice field next week, that means he's 100% health-wise. That means completely physically, he's cleared all those hurdles. So what he has to do remaining, and Jim Irsay's talked about this, is those 4 inches between the ears, right, is that mental hurdle. And it's a very real thing. Even for a guy who's played a lot of football like Andrew Luck, he has to feel the pocket. He has to feel offensive linemen backing into him. He has to make throws under pressure, and he needs to get hit somehow. And the shoulder specialist that I talked to said, maybe you hit him, with a gymnastics pad or something. Maybe you have a lineman knock him to the ground. But if that lineman knocks him to the ground and it hurts the shoulder, the team doctor that approved that probably loses his job, right? So there is a fine line, and you have to kind of walk that. But, Peyton Manning's talked about this before. You got to get that first hit in on that injured part to sort of get back to real football. Andrew Luck's going to take a couple of weeks, I think, to get back to a realer form of football. It's not going to be a 2-day, 3-day thing, as much as T.Y. Hilton wants it to be. It's going to take a little bit of time, and what you want to see is you want to see him knock to the ground, maybe take a hit, and bounce right back up and sort of get that confidence back. But the main thing is there is light at the end of the tunnel, and these are just really timing These are the last few steps you need to take. But the bulk of the work, getting him back on the field, is nearing completion.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, when you put this in perspective, you talked about this being the 9th month of this process. So if we're talking about another couple of weeks, well, in the big scheme of things, that's nothing. Okay,
Right.
so there's perspective is important here. That's for one, and then furthermore, what I think we have to remember is you talked about the physical part of it and getting used to football, right, and those kinds of things. There's also a couple of other things. There's some technique things, and I talked to, for example, Rich Gannon, and I'm going to do a story on this at some point. And Rich Gannon, obviously the former NFL quarterback, he's now an analyst for CBS, a really good analyst, and I think he made a couple of good points. He told me, he said, look at Cam Newton, and Cam Newton's not playing well right now, and Cam Newton had a very limited amount of work in the preseason and training camp, and you could argue they rushed him back. I don't know enough about that situation to have an opinion, but you could maybe speculate that maybe they rushed him back and he didn't get enough preparation, certainly. And so now he's out there and he's just trying to play catch up, but he's doing it in the context of playing regular season games.
That is the Indianapolis Colts' worst nightmare.
Right. And so, and Rich Gannon, who I trust his quarterback eye, he says when you watch Cam Newton, he says he's not playing confident. He said you can tell his mechanics aren't where they need to be. So these are all things that Andrew Luck's going to have to work on. Okay, footwork. Footwork is so important. Remember last year when Brian Schottenheimer was hired,
right,
that was something that Schottenheimer said he wanted to really focus on, was getting Andrew's footwork where it needed to be.
Because that's a bad tendency of his. When plays would break down, he would go to backyard football, and he's great, right, at creating stuff out of nothing.
Right.
But if you can lean on that footwork and those fundamentals, and he threw less interceptions last year, so that's Schottenheimer. That's a good point.
Right. And so that only comes from one thing, and it's repetition. It's reps. That's it.
Now, isn't he getting footwork training right now? I mean, he's making all the throws right now. We would assume.
But not in an actual pocket with defenders like Jonathan Hankins is not rushing the quarterback when he's out there, playing
and I think
against air.
I think he needs that.
Yeah. And the one thing I thought it was interesting, it's going to sound funny, but Chuck Pagano said this the other day, and it was not something I ever considered, but they did this with Vontae Davis last week, and they're going to do it with Andrew Luck. When he gets back out to the practice, he's not going to say, hey, Jacoby Brissett, move over and give me the first team reps, because that's crazy. You can't do that. So how do you get a guy reps in the course of the regular season when you got to play a game on Sunday and he's not going to play?
And Jacoby Brissett needs every rep he can get.
Right. And the answer is you put him on the scout team,
right,
which is kind of hilarious.
He's going to be the most overqualified scout team quarterback there ever was.
He's certainly going to be the highest paid. Okay?
Right.
There's no doubt about that.
That's good money, right?
I mean, think about that. I mean, there's going to be a guy on the practice squad at playing receiver with Andrew Luck.
Yeah.
And he's going
Matt Hazel or somebody like that.
And he's going to lay into him come on, man. And and the kid's going to be like, oh my God, Philip Walker doesn't treat me this way.
He's going to light up the scout team. He's going to light him up.
I think he might.
That's a good way to build his confidence back. Have him play against the scout team.
But what actually happens though quite often, and Rich Gannon pointed this out to me, the scout team actually gets better competition in some cases because they're going to go up against the first defense.
Because they're
the look squad, quote unquote,
so he'll be playing as Brian Hoyer, the 49ers quarterback, hypothetically.
That would be hilarious, right?
He's a lot better. Yeah.
He really would be, actually. Yeah. Right. So he'd be out there mimicking the 49ers offense next week. I think he can handle that. Yeah. I'm just saying, I think he can handle that.
What a strange spot we're in right now. This is week 4 of the 2017 season, and we're talking about Andrew Luck on the practice. Well, not on the practice squad. Excuse me, the scout team. I don't want to.
Andrew Luck.
He is on the active
team
right
quarterback.
Right.
It really is bizarre, but it makes total sense, and again, it solves that problem, which was, what do you do with him, and how do you get him reps?
And another point to that Vontae Davis point you made is Vontae Davis practiced all of last week. He practiced on the Friday before as well. Mm-hmm. So usually in years past, if he practiced on Friday and he was a full go, he was on the field on Sunday. They held him out.
Right.
Maybe cautionary. Maybe they're just not ready to throw him in there. That's another kind of wrinkle we've seen maybe under Chris Ballard. It lends to that point he made early in August about we need guys to practice. They need to be out there with their teammates, and they're going to get them, some more detailed work as the week goes on before they just throw him out there. So you're going to see Andrew Luck practice for maybe 2 weeks. If he does not play against the 49ers, and the Tennessee Titans. Then the following week, I think, is a home game against Jacksonville.
Right.
Then they go to Cincinnati. So one of those games in October, he should be out there. I don't think it'll be 49ers, though.
Yeah, that's pretty much a
Right.
pipe dream, I think. Just because if everything they've said, if they stick to everything that they have said in terms of the way they're going to handle Andrew Luck, and they have for the most part. I know people think there have been inconsistencies, but they've said from the beginning they were going to be really cautious and really conservative. Well, I think they have.
Chuck Pagano and Chris Ballard have been very cautious.
Yeah.
Jim Irsay has been a little cavalier with his predictions.
But those are more his words than his actions, right?
Right, correct, right.
Which, big shocker there.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting, and there's going to be a lot of anticipation. But all I can do is preach patience with you right now. I think it's going to take time, and the Colts are ready for that.
The one thing that's made this a little easier to swallow if you're an Indianapolis Colts fan is the quarterback spot has been secured. I mean, it's you saw what happened in L.A. I mean, we were there, and it was an absolute disaster. And you saw how quickly bad quarterbacking play can sink a team that's mediocre at best.
Yep.
Jacoby Brissett has alleviated a lot of those problems. And, yes, I know they beat the Browns and all that, but he's your quarterback, and you got to feel pretty good about it. He's impressed me. I mean, I knew he had a big arm coming in, but the poise and the way he's handled, some tough situations, he's been really impressive. And I know you're working on a story about him for later in this week.
Yeah, keep an eye out for that, maybe tomorrow or Friday. But one thing that I think that goes unmentioned with Jacoby Brissett, and this is not just a Browns game, this is just generally speaking. He walks in the huddle. He has a confidence about him for a 24-year-old guy, first of all, who's in his second year in the NFL.
Right.
So
Remember that.
That is notable, okay, when you're in the huddle with him. I wasn't in the huddle with him, but this is what guys said. So I'm taking their word for it. But anyhow, there's that. And then there's just the fact that he carries himself with a little bit of a swagger. He is not a cocky guy whatsoever. He is a humble kid, and I love that about him. But he does play with a little bit of swagger and poise, as you mentioned.
You have to have that if you're a quarterback.
Yeah.
Your players have to believe in you.
Well, you hit it on the head. I was going to say, guys are latching on to his coattails. And they're like, you know what? We're good. We're going to let this guy lead us. Now, he's not Andrew Luck, right? He's not. He's not even like Andy Dalton probably, right? I mean, but these days he might be. But that's a whole other subject. But I think they have to see in their quarterback a guy who they can believe in. And I know everybody said the right things about Scott Tolzien.
They
like Scott Tolzien as a guy, but they didn't believe in him. You can't.
You could tell.
You can't possibly.
You cannot fabricate that. You cannot manufacture that belief. It's real. And this is a huge jump, and I'm not comparing him to Tom Brady, who he played under in New England, but you talk about those Patriots players at halftime of the Super Bowl, and they're, you know the score and we know the situation. They said if there's one guy that can do this, it's him. And that belief really matters in this game. And I've been talking to a lot of Colts from the Peyton Manning days for a story that's going to come out next week about number 18 and the statues going up and all that. But they keep going back to just how he elevated their play by sheer will. And no, Jacoby Brissett's not on that level yet. But there are similarities in a way a quarterback can lift his teammates up. We never got that sense in August. We never got that when Scott Tolzien was a quarterback. And we're not trying to bash Scott Tolzien, but you could just tell. The fire wasn't in guys' eyes about the quarterback position. And Jacoby Brissett has lifted this team up to some degree. We'll see this weekend how he plays in Seattle, because that's going to be a really, really tough environment to play in.
Yeah.
But if he can do it there, they got something.
Yeah, they really would. That really would indicate they have something. But they have something clearly. Much we know already.
Right.
That would take it to another level. Clearly, I'm not picking them to win this game. I don't think anybody is. But I think even an impressive showing, I think, would really, I think, continue to build that faith that his teammates have in him, because he's going to have to play at least a couple more weeks at minimum. Yeah,
and you feel okay about it.
Yeah. You
which
feel
is
like
a step up from where you were on September 10th.
Right. This game would have been a tough game for Andrew Luck at full strength, right? So it is what it is. But you feel like next week going into a San Francisco 49ers game, you feel like, okay, I take my chances with Jacoby Brissett.
And the Colts were 2-3. If they beat the San Francisco 49ers next week, they're 2-3.
Mm-hmm.
And they were 2-3 with Andrew Luck last year.
Exactly.
So, I mean,
exactly.
that's the NFL for you.
Right. So as far as the Browns game is concerned, and we touched on a little bit of this already, but the one thing that was good in that game, I thought Brissett was much more aggressive. The first start that he had against Arizona, his longest completion was 20 yards. This time, now granted, the Browns don't have Patrick Peterson, right? And they moved Joe Hayden.
They don't have Joe
cut
Hayden
Joe Hayden
either,
and all that. They were missing their top pass rusher. So, yeah, they were depleted, and the Browns. But that being said, I think just the approach to the game was much more aggressive from Rob Chudzinski and certainly from Jacoby Brissett. And he had this week, I think, 6 completions of 20 yards or more. So you saw that in the productivity of T.Y. Hilton,
and
who you talked to this week.
And I mean, you saw it on the sideline. T.Y. Hilton ran off the field after that big touchdown, and Chuck Pagano hugged him and said, "It's good to have you back." T.Y. Hilton was on the field the first 2 weeks, but he wasn't T.Y. Hilton, and you could tell on Sunday he was like the T.Y. Hilton of old. And
I love when they, by the way, I love when they confirm what we see,
right,
which is that was Chuck saying, "Hey, you haven't even been involved the last couple of weeks," and haven't we said that? But go ahead.
Right. I mean, we're always right.
Right.
They just catch on later.
Follow our lead.
But this was a great point you made maybe a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago about Jacoby Brissett. His skill set more aligns with what this offense wants to do with Andrew Luck on the field. And I get that he's not on the field, but you have to design your offense around what your players can do. And what does T.Y. Hilton do? He's great at that out route. He's good down the field. He's got the speed. And we just talked to Pete Carroll, and he says, look, he's fast, man. And he didn't just say it. I mean, you could tell it was very genuine, and that this guy's given us trouble before, and he better not do it on Sunday.
Yeah.
If you remember that game from 2013. And look, Dante Moncrief, throw the ball up and go get it. He's a big body. He did it on Sunday against the Browns after not doing the previous week against the Cardinals. So you're seeing the offense look a little bit more like normal. And the bottom line in the NFL, the most basic thing of the offense is get the ball to your playmakers and let them do what they do best. That's what they did against the Browns, and Jacoby Brissett allows them to do that. Right. So I give a lot of credit to Rob Chudzinski for the first half Sunday. I didn't think he put his foot on the gas at all in the second half. And Brian Schottenheimer, as the man behind the scenes, the quarterback coach, he's done a wonderful job with Brissett in just a 3-week window.
Yeah. So you talked about that game 4 years ago against Seattle, and that was that was sort of his coming out party, I thought. He certainly his first year he made a mark. There's no question about that.
Right.
But I think that was maybe the game where I think he took things to another level
against that defense.
Yeah, and against Sherman in a lot of cases. Do you remember his numbers in that game? I don't. He
had 140 and I think one touchdown.
I believe that's right. Yeah. And they came from behind, if I'm not mistaken.
They did. They were down at least 12-0, and that's when that big play happened. And we asked Pete Carroll about it today. We just talked to him on a conference call, and he kind of said, "Yeah, I remember that big play on the sideline." He wasn't really apt to talk about it, but he knows what T.Y. can do. He talked about Frank Gore a little bit and all the problems Frank gave them when he was in San Francisco as that feature back. But that was your first year on the beat.
Yeah.
I remember that Seattle game as a fantastic game. I think it was 33-28 was the final.
Right.
The Colts beat 3 of the final 4 teams in the NFL that year, including the 2 Super Bowl contestants. But that was a game where they said, all right, we're ready to play with the elite teams, and T.Y. really proved I can hang with anybody. If he can hang with Richard Sherman, he can hang with anybody. Yeah,
they had a couple of those wins in 2012, certainly. The Packers game comes to mind, obviously.
They were fewer and far between because of the schedule that year.
But right, exactly. But those wins are sort of milestone wins because, as you said, they give you that confidence that you can do that and that you can compete with anybody. And that Seahawks game was certainly the first of those in the 2013 season. If I'm not mistaken, I think what was the first? It was the Raiders, maybe. They opened with the Raiders that year,
yep,
I believe, and barely won that game.
Won ugly against Terrell Pryor,
and so they were kind of shaky to start the year. Lost to the Dolphins, if I remember correctly, who didn't play particularly well.
Then they went to San Francisco and won.
Yeah. So it was another of those checkmark wins where you say to yourself, okay, all right, I see what you got. And we'll see. There would be that same sort of win for this team. It would be that and then some, right?
Yeah,
I mean, this team with no expectations this year. So we'll have to see. But I think if nothing else, they'll take some shots at Seattle. And they got nothing to lose.
You think
they got a quarterback who can at least, put them in position to
Is
take some of
Seattle
those.
still Seattle?
That is a very good question.
Because they're 1-2, and they struggled at times last year. And every defense gets old, and they just got run over by Tennessee. And I like Tennessee. I like the way they run the ball, and I like their offense if Mariota's accurate. And I know the Colts are not Tennessee right now, but
I think it's a fair question.
I think there are cracks in the armor that weren't there in 2013 and 14 when they made back-to-back runs to the Super Bowl.
Well, look, here are the Colts' opportunities, right? So I would normally look at Seattle and say, well, there's not a lot of chinks, but here's where they have a couple of vulnerabilities. Their offensive line is an absolute disaster, okay?
Right.
And
you think the Colts line's bad?
Yeah.
We know about the Colts line.
So the reason that works out well for the Colts is because their best unit is up front.
Oh, I've been impressed with the front seven.
The front seven's solid.
Especially the line,
Yeah.
the defensive line.
So the front seven's legit. And if those guys can exploit that, now you're going to make Russell Wilson really work. And he can work you over still, okay? Like, I'm not saying that's the ball game. All I'm saying is if they keep it in check and keep Russell Wilson in check, which is easier said than done, but if they make it tough on him, then at least you give your offense an opportunity. I don't know that the Colts offense can overcome that challenge, though, of the Seattle defense.
They have struggled offensively, though.
But they have struggled offensively.
The Seahawks have, period.
They're just not scoring a lot of points.
Yeah, and the Colts, not a lot of room for error. But if they can really control the game defensively, and yeah, I just said that out loud. It sounds strange, but you got to like the way a guy like John Simon is playing off the edge. The sack he had in the first quarter last week was all – I turned to you and said that was just all effort.
Guy's unbelievable.
And you just haven't seen that from a Colts player since Robert Mathis' heyday in 2013. Speaking of 2013. So, nice change of pace there. And if you can get Sheard's playing better and John Simon as well, that can change the game. And that offensive line is something they can attack.
Yeah. Look, we'll see. I mean, anything's possible. Stranger things have happened. I'm not making any predictions because we're really bad at predictions. We have proven that.
I think it's still a step forward if they keep this close and play competitive football.
And as you said, come home and get a win against a vulnerable San Francisco team.
You cannot lose when Peyton Manning's going into the Ring of Honor.
Wouldn't he just give it back?
He'd just be like, "You're not good enough to be in the stadium that I built."
Wouldn't he just walk out of the stadium and just say, "You know what, Jim? Never mind.
Right. Yeah.
I'm good."
We had a good thing going, and then you guys are losing to the 49ers right now.
Exactly. So anyhow, let's move forward a little bit. They've had other injuries beyond Andrew Luck, and certainly we mentioned Vontae Davis. He's been one of them. Ryan Kelly has been one of them. Not a whole lot of progress yet on Eric Swope, but he's out 8 weeks anyway because he's on IR. So
he did vow he will be back this season,
and I think that is pretty clear. Yes. So you will see Eric Swope more than likely, unless something goes horribly wrong.
He's working 7 days a week in rehab. He said.
Wow. Yeah. Unless something goes horribly wrong, you'll see Eric Swope, and I think he adds just a great dimension to this offense. So anyhow, the point is, what I bring this up because I think. If and when Andrew Luck comes back, I mean, not when. I mean, he's coming back. It's when, not if, I should say. When he comes back, if he's Andrew Luck, and I don't expect him to be in midseason form. Okay, I think it's going to be rough, actually. But that being said, you'll still take that, right?
Oh yeah,
you'll still take that, and if you get Vontae Davis out there, and now you get Ryan Kelly back, and you can stabilize that offensive line. It's starting to crack a little bit here and there. Those guys are hanging in there, but they need the help, I think. There's no question. And so, I mean, I'm not suggesting they're going to be in the playoffs or win the division, or I don't know what the hell's going to happen. All I know is I think they can make this thing interesting. If nothing else, they'll be a competitive football team, won't they?
Yeah, I mean, if you can scrape your way to 4-4 at the midway point somehow. I mean, Cincinnati's struggling. Tennessee's going to be a tough game at night.
I think
so.
but they haven't lost to the Titans since 2011. And if Andrew Luck's back, he's sort of that guy that just pulls out the game. They've won so many games in the fourth quarter against the Titans. You know, what's to say he won't do it again? But this is a big week for this team, and it has nothing to do with 12. It has everything to do with them getting two of their three best players back, if just only in the practice field. Ryan Kelly and Vontae Davis coming back is huge for this team. Vontae Davis is their best defensive player, and Ryan Kelly probably back next week. That's a huge boost for that line.
And Deshaun Bond's been very solid in that spot, but you cannot put a price on these quote unquote stud players. This team just doesn't have very many of them. It's T.Y. Hilton and a bunch of guys right now.
Right.
And this team doesn't have a lot of those stud players. When you do get those guys back, it's a huge impact across the field, not only statistically.
Yeah, and you just mentioned something there that's not relevant to injuries necessarily, but maybe think about something. You talked about T.Y. Hilton and a bunch of guys. Well, we talked last week about Dante Moncrief and just sort of, is he does he need to do more, I guess?
Well, he's their number 3 receiver right now.
Well, that's what I was getting to.
Right.
So, interestingly, you probably missed if you blinked if you blinked on Sunday, but at the start of that game, there were 2 receivers in the game, and their names were T.Y. Hilton and Kamar Aiken. Very, very interesting. Now, Kamar Aiken got a concussion in the first quarter of the game, so it didn't really impact the game. But you asked, I think, Chuck Pagano on Monday about that, and he was very clear. I thought he made it very clear that was our decision. Yes, Kamar Aiken was our starting receiver. So if that ain't a wake-up call for Dante Moncrief, I don't know what is. And you know what that told me? It showed me something about this staff right now, because that's a move they might have been reluctant to make, I think, in the past.
Right.
And
guys were starters just because they were starters.
Right, and it was really hard to lose your job around here, I felt like. So this year we've seen a couple of instances. We've seen LaRaven Clark get benched in the preseason. Granted, he needed to be, but I'm just saying, but they did it, right?
Right.
And we've seen guys get moved around on the offensive line. We've seen now this move with Dante Moncrief. TJ Green started the opener, right, at corner, and now where they were short a corner, they went and they got Pierre Desser and started him on Sunday. I know you don't know who that is, but trust me, he plays for the Colts.
He was there.
Yeah, and he played okay.
Yeah.
So is accountability, do you think there's been more accountability, and do you think it was, well, certainly was needed, but do you think it'll make a difference?
Chris Ballard is walking what he preached.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to look at it that way, this is what it is. I mean, accountability and competition, and you're going to earn every spot you have on this team. And Dante Moncrief didn't earn it against the Arizona Cardinals. I think that's pretty obvious. And I think the Colts made the move loud and clear and said, we're going to start Kamar Aiken, who's been here for a couple months and has been okay, but hasn't wowed a lot of people. I think,
but he's done what's been asked of him. Like when he hasn't dropped balls, and he's worked hard.
Competed when the ball is in the air. And
yes,
this is a contract year for Dante Moncrief, and I think the writing's on the wall. If you do not perform, your spot is not safe, and I think it's very obvious. And to give Chris Ballard credit, he's put into practice what he's preached so far in terms of competition, and you have to earn the spot. And Dante Moncrief is a perfect example. There's not many sacred cows on this roster. You might have thought Dante Moncrief was last year, not this year.
Yeah, and I think that's all positive and probably overdue. So let's touch on, I guess, wood choppers. We haven't done that. So we always do the wood chopper of the week, right? The Jack Doyle really was the inspiration for this. Now, Jack Doyle, I don't know what to tell you.
Cut him.
I think the time has come.
It's over.
Worst performance I've ever seen from Jack Doyle.
Lifelong underachiever.
The guy clearly doesn't care about football. He's got to go.
It was actually funny asking Eric Swope and Chuck Pagano about Jack Doyle, like, what's going on? Is the world coming into an end? Trust me, he'll be fine. He'll be back. If there's ever a guy who's going to bounce back from maybe his worst performance as a pro, a couple drops. I know he was pretty despondent in the locker room afterwards.
And the fumble was critical, too. I mean, that could have really hurt them. And,
it dearly did, yeah.
Yeah, and so I was talking to Frank Gore today just about, sort of pass protecting against Seattle, and I mentioned to him, I said, well, Jack Doyle, you guys really used him a lot last week, and if you go back and watch the game, he's in the backfield as an H-back protecting and doing all these different things. And he said, oh man, he says, I know he had a couple of drops. He's like, man, Jack worked his butt off in that game, and he says, man, I play with Jack Doyle any day. But you're right, though. I think you got to have a guy like that on your team, and that's why it was just foreign for us to see a guy who's so fundamental.
Right, and you don't want 2 drops or a drop and a fumble to overshadow the body of work. I mean, Dwayne Allen would always point this out, and he's right. Tight ends are not just pass catchers. He's a football player,
And there's so much value to guys that can protect the quarterback, especially with this offensive line being so up and down.
Yeah, he makes a couple huge blocks in that game that I didn't really appreciate till I went back and watched the second time. But anyhow, wood choppers, I tell you, I mean, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to go T.Y. Hilton.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to – look, he talked a big game and he backed it up. And, we kind of asked him about it. How come every time you talk a big game, you back it up? And he's like, maybe I should do this every week. Yeah, T.Y., you should, because in terms of star power, this team doesn't have a lot right now. And you need to do the same thing this week against a really, really much, a much better defense than you did last week. But, look, I mean, he made things happen. He created stuff. And he gave them a huge lead early, and that was enough to hold on for the win. So congratulations to T.Y. Hilton.
So I'm going to go with a different guy on the other side of the football, Rashaan Melvin.
Oh, great pick.
And so here's Rashaan Melvin, this guy who I think has been on about 4 different teams, if I recall.
He has been cut 5 times in 4 years.
I mean, think about that. That's amazing. So here this guy is. He comes in here last year. No one knows who he is. And he ends up starting a bunch of games because everybody got hurt. Remember likes of Patrick Robinson?
No, I don't.
Antonio Cromartie.
No, I don't.
I mean, like those dudes were literally on the Indianapolis Colts last year. And there's probably 3 guys who started at corner last year who are not here this year, which is amazing. The Daryl Morrises.
Yeah.
All these guys, right? So he was the guy who was like the lone survivor from that group him and Vontae Davis, obviously. And he just found a way to always stay on the field and make plays when he was on the field. I give him credit, man. And so he comes up with a career day with 2 interceptions. And this, by the way, is on the heels of the Arizona game where he played great.
He was rated as Pro Football Focus's top corner in football.
Yep.
If you buy into that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that grade was actually. I mean, look, I don't know what their system is necessarily for the grading, but I thought that grade was pretty fair. I mean, it felt like he had a great game.
He allowed
that day.
3 passes on 9 attempts. I mean, you can do the math. That's great for a cornerback in this league against as good as the quarterbacks and receivers are.
Right. So. You can say they played DeShone Kizer, whatever. I get that.
It certainly helps.
And he's not the most accurate guy. I mean, he completed like 45% of his passes with some drops, granted, in his defense. But man, just huge plays. And that's something that this defense, the corners in particular, they don't get a lot of picks. I think Malik Hooker is going to be an interception guy. He's going to have some numbers in terms of interceptions. He's already got 2, and I'm sure that's going to continue. But their corners have never really been really productive in terms of interceptions. And this guy comes up with 2 huge ones to end two critical drives in the second half. I mean, that's huge, man. And so I give him a lot of credit. Again, just kind of sticking in there and earning the job and keeping it.
A quiet guy. Mm-hmm. We don't talk to him that often. Doesn't make a lot of racket in the locker room.
Right.
Never gets hurt. Is always out there. It never gets hurt since he got here. That's what held him back in previous stops.
Right.
But this was a kind of a cool moment in the locker room. Chris Ballard walked up to Melvin after the game and just kind of whispered in his ear, and I asked Melvin about it afterward. He's like, look, just good things are happening to you now. Keep doing exactly what you're doing, and good things will continue to happen. Mm-hmm. He is I wrote this on Sunday. Melvin is some of the best parts of the NFL. There's guys like that who keep getting cut, and just keep working at it and won't let the league kick him out. And he had a great day Sunday. And he makes you feel really good about that cornerback position because Quincy Wilson will be back in the next couple weeks, and Vontae Davis will be back this week. And finally, this team has some depth at that position.
Yeah. And to wrap up on a related note, the secondary, interesting thing that I thought I saw there, and I wrote about this briefly yesterday, the way they used the safeties. So they're using 3 safeties, which I think is really interesting. So Malik Hooker, by the way, he's never coming off the field ever again.
Yeah, how many?
He played like 76 of 77 snaps. I think he's a starter.
Nothing like an on-the-job education.
Exactly.
For the 23-year-old.
I think he's going to play a little bit. So there was that. But then they rotated Darius Butler and Matthias Farley, with Butler playing in sort of the third and long situations or passing situations, and Matthias Farley playing on early downs, which is really interesting. So
they like him in the box.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of 41 in the box.
And it worked, which was great. And what they did was they actually on third down brought Malik Hooker down to match up with the tight end, and had Darius play the deep safety, which was unexpected.
They
at
did
least
that
for
more
me.
than once with Hooker, and look at him. He can hang with the tight ends.
Yeah, and I think they're going for the size matchup there is what they're doing, because that was something a couple people asked me, why not have Darius go down there and do that? He's been a slot corner.
Right.
Well, they're trying to take advantage of that size, and Malik Hooker, by the way, he's a massive kid, by the way, and I get it. I mean, to move the way he does and to be as athletic as he is at that size is just really impressive.
He's got linebacker size.
He does. He really does. So anyway, that's a little bit of what's going on here. There's always a lot going on, and hopefully we give you a little bit of insight into it. And sorry we couldn't be more fortune tellers with Andrew Luck, but we do our best. So, but at least now we know next week is supposed to be the week, and I don't know, get your popcorn ready, I guess, or something. I mean, it's just practice. It's not that interesting. So anyway, I'm Stephen Holder here with Zach Keefer. Thanks for listening. Lots to come on IndyStar.com. Check out my story on Jacoby Brissett. Little couple surprises coming up in there that you didn't know about Jacoby. And then Zach's also got a piece on T.Y. Hilton I think you should check out. So that's it for us. Thanks for listening. I'm Stephen Holder with Zach Keefer.